everybody, welcome to Ground Zero Salem. I'm your host, Pat. Just one thing, little PSA I want to get out of the way before I continue on with the rest of this video. Something I've been wanting to address. You know, since I stopped cutting my hair about a year and a half ago, I've been getting more and more people going, "Hey man, you look like Glenn Danzig. You know, you look like Danzig. Hey, young Danzig." And honestly, I'm getting a little fucking sick of it. I mean, needless to say, I'm a big fan of his music and his art. He's a cultural icon, for sure. And at least in his earlier days, a complete genius and responsible for 3 of my favorite bands. All the way up to Danzig 4. I liked Red Death Sabaoth, or whatever it is again, a lot. But, you know, as far as what he's had to, some things he's had to say, you know, I'm not comfortable with the comparison. We're 2 very different people. And on top of that, I really don't look that much like that guy. I mean, come on. It's just the hair, maybe general shape of the face. So if everybody out there could just give it a rest, okay? Just give it a rest. Welcome to my book collection. This is just a small part of my book collection. Got a book right here. This book's about dragons. Stories about dragons. They're all true, all documented. Just fucking around. Let's talk about books. Alright, I got jokes. So, I'm a reader. We got ourselves a reader, Bill Hicks. When I was younger, I used to read a lot more fiction. A lot of fantasy stuff, a bit of sci-fi, lots of horror. I'm sure the case with a lot of you out there is the same, you know. As I've gotten older, I don't know, it's just my dissolving attention span. I find that I'd still like to read and I tear through books, but they're mostly of the autobiographical or biographical quality. And for a while now, I've been collecting a lot of books on music and a few other things. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of a lot of these. There's a lot of bazillion point stuff in here, and a lot of you guys who are fans of metal and hardcore probably have these, but I think I might have a few that are a little bit more on the obscure side and some out-of-print stuff, so it'll take up 20 minutes of your time or more, knowing how I ramble, just talking about the books I have and what I like about them. Might as well start at the beginning here. Topic of discussion from a moment ago. This is Misery Obscura. It's Eerie Von's book. Cool thing about Eerie Von was that the entire time he was kind of a Misfits fanboy and roadie up through his last days in Danzig, he was a photographer. So this is an amazing 25-year document with all these great, beautiful photographs of just all these great early pictures of the Misfits going through the Samhain days, and then I believe he was in Samhain at the very end, but he was hanging out with the band a lot. Great old pictures of the Misfits up through the Danzig era. Plus, like, did Glenn Danzig get a nose job at some point? Does it look like that? I mean, no judgments. You know, it just looks different. I love the classic. He's wearing a Count Chocula shirt in these. Very, very fucking cool. Awesome photography. In it, there's, you know, it's the whole story. It's like a kind of a shorter, you know, quick autobiography in between. This is his first band, Rosemary's Babies, who are great fucking New Jersey hardcore. Them and another band called, is it Morningside? Something Morning in the name? It's not ringing a bell right now, but there's another awesome band that was like a Misfits Junior kind of band. Somebody can probably remind me what that was, but I wish I could remember it because they were really, really good. But yeah, going through the Danzig stuff, so that's great. This is actually on Dark Horse Books, the comic label. Right next to it on there, this is one that is kind of hard to get, I think. It's basically a glorified big glossy zine called Glorious Times, the pictorial of the death metal scene, 1984 to 1991. And it's just a bunch of guys from a bunch of awesome bands just writing about their memories. Some great old photos. Look at that. Young Chuck in an Iron Maiden shirt. Growing his hair out. He's got weird teeth. R.I.P. Chuck. Deicide. Awesome early Deicide picture with the masks. Insanity. There's some Lethal Aggression. There's some more obscure stuff in here too. Massacres in here. Mass Appeal. There's a bit of crossover into like thrash and hardcore and a little bit, but mostly bands that kind of played with death metal bands. I think Cryptic Slaughter's in here, for example. Yeah, random stuff like Pain Eater. I don't know anything about them. Primeval, you know, there's some, they dig pretty deep. It gets pretty obscure, but there's some heavy hitters in here too. Lots of talk about that original Day of Death festival that was in Buffalo that like everybody played. So yeah, really, really cool if you can track that down, that Glorious Times book. What else? I got this insane, technically it's a zine, I guess, but it's the size of a fucking phone book. This compilation of death. This is great. Third coming, so I guess it's the third issue, but just wonderful, wonderful autopsy. There's tons of interviews, again, with a lot of heavy hitters and a lot of more obscure bands. Aggressor. Great layout with all these little drawings. You know, awesome cut and paste style. Deceased interview there, but yeah, look at that. It's awesome. Glad that I picked that up. One that I think probably a lot of people out there have is the reissue, the Choosing Death, repress, whatever you want to call it. Expands a lot more than on the original edition. They cover Finland and Holland in this, which was always a big missing piece of just talking about. They talked a lot about Albert Madryan. He's written a lot of stuff. Talked a lot about, you know, the earache scene and the Florida scene, but kind of skipped over some of the kind of more obscure scenes, even though they had a ton of stuff going on, like Finland. And towards the end, that they start talking about newer bands. There's a lot of tech death and stuff like Necrophagus that they talk about, but they also get into like Horrendous and some other newer bands. They talk about Portal. Not the biggest Portal guy myself, but hey, they were a big part of the scene. I don't think they're around anymore. Got Harley Flanagan's book here, Hardcore Life of My Own. It's a must-read to complement the John Joseph book. See where the discord lies between these two. Both books are insane autobiographies of just life on the streets, persevering through it. Great New York hardcore history. Probably my favorite hardcore scene, and just the stories that some of these guys have to tell about near misses with death and drugs and everything. It's crazy. They lived through some pretty tough shit. I just read Roger Moretz from AF's book. I don't have a physical copy of it. I read it on my Kindle app, but that's also an excellent read as well. City Baby. This is Ross Lohman, the bass player from GBH's autobiography. Also really cool. Lots of great stories. Got a lot of books, so try to go bring it down on the yapping so much. This is fucking essential right here. Daniel Ekeroth's Swedish death metal book. Had this for a while. I was lucky to pick up a lot of these Bazillion Points books when I worked at Newbury Comics. I had like a 40% discount on stuff that wasn't music, so I really took advantage of that. But I mean, if you're looking to get into Swedish death metal and you want a little dig deeper than just Entombed and Unleashed and Dismember and Grave, this is a great place to go. Very comprehensive with all the early stuff. There's a huge glossary of bands in the back, a list of demos. There's a companion CD, which is across the room right now, it's a 3 CD that has a lot of great essential stuff on it. Merciless, very well written, well researched. This guy Daniel Ekeroth has written other books. I believe he wrote a book on like Swedish B-movie cinema, which sounds interesting, although I'm not that interested in movies, like as far as being any kind of cinephile, so I'm not sure if I get into it as much, but I mean, good stuff. Decibel Precious Metal. This is, you know, retellings and interviews about classic albums. I'm sure probably a lot of people have heard of this. You know, Rain and Blood, Napalm Death Scum, Repulsion's Horrified, Altars of Madness. You know, a lot of classic records, and it's you know, it's well written, some pretty good stories. Botch's We Are the Romans, Converge's Jane Doe. Yeah, some stuff I'm not so into, but Slaughter of the Soul, Dark Throne's Transylvanian Hunger. Cool shit. How we doing on time here? 8 minutes. This is Crate Digger by a guy named Bob Surin. Bob used to run a distro/record store in Brandon, Florida, right outside of Tampa, called Sound Idea, that I mail ordered pre-internet a bunch of times from. I think I mentioned that. I think I mentioned this book too. This is just a great personal story about a crazy, obsessive record collector, Bob, who tracked down all this stuff, tracked down releases by bands from Brazil, and went to Brazil himself to release them, and just a very passionate lover of music. There's a certain dark side to the book about, Bob's kind of like addiction to vinyl and how he kind of left it all behind. Spoiler alert. But great autobiography about his love for music. Very nice guy, for what it's worth. I used to go in there all the time. I lived in Florida for like 9 months, and he's always a very cool person, very sweet man. A bunch of writings from Ben Weasel. I think these are all from his columns in MRR. Punk is a 4-letter word. Divisive figure, especially the couple of years ago. Definitely done some shitty things and said some shitty things, but the classic Screeching Weasel records and a lot of his old columns are a pretty fun read. Smart guy, regardless of shittiness of his character. Interesting stuff to say, interesting storytelling, rants and so forth. What else? Oh, I mean, I would think that a good chunk of you out there in extreme metal YouTube land have this, but maybe not. I'm not sure if it's still readily available or it's gone out of print. I picked it up right after it came out, thanks to my discount, and that was 7 years ago, maybe less, I don't know, my memory sucks, but another bazillion points one. Just another one where there was a photographer on hand who I believe was Martin Eric Ain. I think he was the photography nut. But just these early photos of Hellhammer, and just the isolation of where they were geographically and how they kind of created what they were about out of so few cues. I mean, new wave of British heavy metal and some other stuff, but just, in a vacuum created this monster of a concept and a band. Very, very cool photos. There's some really classic looking shit in here, like fucking that, the helmet. Just really great band photos. Of course, the cover there, the iconic Tom with a shield. Really cool. Really, really cool stuff. There's all the paraphernalia in the back, all these flyers and promo stuff. It's very extensive, and like the Eerie Von book, there's a decent amount of text in there that's, autobiographical from Tom. Great. This is the New York Hardcore book, written by Tony Retman, who's written some other stuff too. I believe he also wrote this. Yes. This is Why Be Something That You're Not. This is about the Detroit scene. This is about the New York scene. Both are awesome. Both are kind of that style of interview snippets, kind of telling the tale. Lots of really, really cool old flyers and photos in here. Harley, young Harley. These awesome Sean Taggart Cro-Mags flyers. That shit's just so cool. I love that art style. Great story. So much interesting stuff. Great chapter on the crossover scene, how, metal kind of took root in New York hardcore and changed everything forever. I believe that's a photo of, that's Nuclear Assault right there, playing. Carnivore, Sheer Terror, and Shock. Sunday, January 12th at CBGB's. Yeah, so it goes all the way through to I believe the early 90s, or maybe beyond. I read this a while ago. But yeah, fucking great read. Burned right through it. Classic United and Strong AF art there. The Detroit book is similar, with lots of, interview snippets, some narrative in between, covering the Fix and the Meatmen, because they lived there for a while. Negative Approach, of course, the old Freezer scene. Great book. I've read this a bunch of times. It's been years at this point, but that's fucking great. This is a really cool one. This Live Suburbia. This book is written by two different guys, and it's kind of telling the story of growing up and having different phases. One guy, Anthony Pappalardo, who played, I want to say in My Eyes, or it might have been 10 Yard Fight, or both. I know he was involved in that youth crew revival stuff, which was never really my cup of tea. Him and this other guy who's from Florida, I think, Max Morton. Pappalardo's from this neck of the woods. He's from, I think, southern New Hampshire and northern Mass. He's from Salem, New Hampshire, which is confusing. But there's a lot of just personal stories about coming down to Boston to go to gigs from him, and then the other guy's writing style is a little bit more stream of consciousness and vague, but they both tell tales, and it's not just about music scene stuff either. They talk about BMX and skateboarding. There's all these phases of youth with collections of photos from all kinds of people, and it's pretty great. I wish I had the wherewithal to bookmark the pages, but I believe it's in this book and another book, which is I'm not remembering, but it's definitely in this book. There's a picture of Al Quint, who's a guy from around here, actually lives down the street from me, who did a zine called Suburban Voice for years, and he's a well-respected figure in the hardcore scene. Just chilling with the guys from Celtic Frost. I love that picture. I wish I could, I don't know, if I can find it, maybe I'll post it up at the end or something, but yeah, there it is. There it is. There's Al, Celtic Frost. Fucking great. But yeah, lots of stuff about, a lot of people seem to have gone through the trajectory of being into metal first and then getting into hardcore, and there's a whole, there's another picture of Al. Whole bunch of stuff about skateboarding. There's a youth crew chapter. Just all the different kind of youth subcultures and people's experiences. Skins. Chapter on that. There's a whole chapter on like New Romantics and death rock and just anecdotes, stories revolving around all that kind of stuff. The last chapter is about how everything's been commodified and everything's ironic and retro, and it's just weird how every single phase of all this stuff since the 70s is all existing simultaneously and doesn't really mean anything anymore, which is depressing, but what are you going to do? A couple books on skateboarding, which are really cool. This is a Jim Phillips book. Jim Phillips was the guy who did all the really cool art for Santa Cruz from the early 80s up until the early 90s, and then he came back later, but, Screaming Hand, that fucking awesome Jeff Grosso board with the demon. It's funny, he did a lot of stuff that was really wild and psychedelic, but guy claimed to never be into drugs. He seemed like a straight shooter. Meanwhile, the guy who did all the art for Powell Peralta, like the Tony Hawk Eagle Skull and the Skull and Snake McGill board and everything, that guy, I always thought his stuff was a lot less imaginative, but I guess that guy was had huge addiction issues. Corey O'Brien, another classic there. The Grosso, tongue sticking out guy, Nodus board, Nodus kitten. But yeah, great book if you're into skateboarding, skateboard art. I love that stuff. I grew up skateboarding as a little kid. This was the era that I started skating at when I was very young, late 80s, early 90s. This is just the Disposable Skateboard Bible, which is just it's just all decks with different art from a lot of different eras, mostly 80s into 90s. There's a few new school boards. It's cool to see the progression from all this sort of gnarly skulls and stuff into like the more pop art and like World Industries kind of sarcastic, cartoony type of shit. But I mean, very, very cool stuff. There's a lot of band boards in here. I actually did take the time to mark to show for you folks these killer Zorlak boards, the awesome pus head art. They definitely had a big partnership with Metallica when Metallica was fucking awesome. That pirate board, all those variants on the pirate board there. If I had a shit ton of money to waste, I would collect, old school skateboard decks, but man, if you think collecting records is expensive, fucking forget about it. I've got a few decks and I haven't even hung them up. I don't have the room down here. Except for that awesome master skateboard deck that I have kind of wedged in between my shelving, which I think I showed off on my, shelving, or take a look at my cool room video that I did a while ago. Anywho, Perpetual Conversion, the Dan Lilker book. This is awesome. Another one where I'm like, it's not on Bazillion Points, it's on some weird publisher that I've never heard of, so I don't know if it's hard to find or not. I don't know if the used copies are up on Amazon, but I mean, it's one of the best and most engaging autobiographies that I've read. Tons of awesome flyers, artwork. I mean, what a journeyman, from Anthrax all the way through to Brutal Truth, all the projects that he did. Hemlock, early U.S. black metal band with one of the guys from Villains. He's done so many fucking projects. He was always ahead of the curve, wearing DRI shirts when he was in Anthrax, and then, later Napalm Death shirts when he was in Nuclear Assault. He always seemed one step ahead in terms of extremity and just discovering cool stuff. He taught Craig Ahead from tons of bands, from Straight Ahead, who was in Agnostic Front and is in Sick of It All now, taught him how to play bass. Just an influential figure, and by everything that I've seen, just a really cool fucking guy. There's a Hemlock ad. We've been listening to, by the way, now that the record's fucking over, this Theater of Hate live LP. Heard of the band, picked it up on a whim at Salem Record Exchange. Sounds really good to me. I'm not going to flip it over because I'm almost done. But yeah, cool, like, kind of gloomy death rock stuff with saxophone, and it works really well for it, I think. But I'll get into it more. I'm going to actually do a little roundup of a bunch of LPs I bought at Salem Record Exchange in the past couple of months. I figure give them some love, talk about that. But anyway, almost done. Almost out of your hair. The Touch and Go Complete Hardcore Punk Scene. This would go along well with the Detroit book, because this is all Tesco V and Dave Stimson did this amazing fanzine in the early 80s. Awesome cut and paste. I mean, if you want to see how a fanzine should look, definitely this, and, well, I'll get to that in a second, the Slayer Mag Diaries. Great interviews, tons of early U.S. punk, and the writing is really what, Undertone's article there, the writing is really what kind of separates it from the pack from a lot of other zines. Very, I'd say, pre-snarky, proto-snarky, opinionated stuff, very funny, pulling no punches. Tesco V, for as lowbrow as his humor is with the Meatmen, I believe was an English teacher and is a very bright man. So his writing is great, razor sharp, good stuff. And I think Dave Stimson was actually even more vicious with a lot of the pulling no punches with reviews and that kind of shit. Go to your home. Yeah, I mean, any banger worth their salt probably knows about Slayer Mag. I never read it back in the day. The first time I got my mitts on any of that stuff was when this came out, which was, again, probably 6 or 7 years ago, I think. But if you want to look at a perfect time capsule of metal in Europe and metal in general, this guy from Norway, incredible zine writer, started, kind of in the thrash era, or maybe a little bit before, was around for all the Norwegian black metal stuff. Amazing layouts. I mean, just the borders and all the pen and ink art. It's totally beautiful. The writing's really good. Good sense of humor for the most part with this guy. Italian. Had a lot of correspondence with Sadistic Execution, which is cool. I think Rock did that logo for this. But yeah, I mean, you probably already know, I would hope, but I don't know what this goes for nowadays. This was $31 before my discount, so I got it for a song. looks like, but it's definitely worth picking up. Anything else on here I feel like talking about? The Murder in the Front Row book. This is cool. This is all about the Bay Area shit. You know, some writing, you know, a little bit of narrative in there, a lot of just sharing memories. Alex Skolnick, Gary Holt, Rob Flynn, woohoo. Images are great, though. All the pictures are great. Another photographer in the scene, man. They were important back in the day, which is the guy who's currently playing bass in DRI. Harold is his first name. Last name is escaping me right now. Sorry, Harold. You rule. Awesome old pictures of Slayer. Yeah, good little history. Tells the tale of the Bay Area scene blowing up very well. This is also on Bazillion Points, and this was a gift from Amanda after I lost this somehow on Father's Day, so that was really fucking nice of her. So yeah, classic early Metallica pictures after they moved to the Bay. Fucking rad. Earlier New York hardcore book, Making a Scene. This actually originally came out in, I want to say sometime in the early 90s or the late 80s. It was re-released in 2011 with a bunch more personal stories added in. I think some additional photos as well. There's some fucking great pictures in here. Early Youth of Today shot. Straight ahead. Great picture of Stigma in the bleacher jeans. 86. Just fucking cool, man. All these people hanging outside of CB's. How about this? Short-haired Peter Steele. There's another picture in here somewhere with him walking down the street. And he looks, I mean, he was a massive man, but he's just huge. And even scarier with short hair. All these awesome Warzone photos there. I think this is the cover from that made it to the cover of the Lower East Side Crew 7-inch. Great picture of Rabies. PMS. I got their LP. It's not bad. I was looking to track that down forever. But they were a rare all-girl band from that time. Also talks about the metal stuff, all the metal bands that would play CBGBs when Crossover dropped. Here's some pictures of Nuclear Assault. Very cool. Brendan Rafferty when he went away to be in Desert Storm from SFA. Amy from Nausea. Their kid that she had with Roger Moret. Nadia was her name. She's like over 30 now, I think. I feel old. That's a cool book if you can track it down. Primal Screamer, I mentioned this, I think in the comments where I was talking about Rudimentary Peni. I think it was because I was talking about Slimy Member. This is a fictional retelling of Nick Blinko's life. It's weird. It's part autobiography and part H.P. Lovecraft. It's written from the viewpoint of his therapist. It gets real weird, but it's great. This is a super private press, like Spare Change Books from the UK. £5, 95p. That's cool Blinko art there. I don't know if this is super hard to find. I imagine it might be. I thought it came out sometime in the early 2000s, but it looks like this is the second edition that came out in 1997, year after I graduated high school, so that was a while ago. Happy hunting with that one. It's definitely a good read. And, this is a very, as far as subcultures go, pretty interesting book, Skinhead by Nick Knight. This involves UK skinhead culture largely before the political influence came in the and all the National Front types started recruiting this working class subculture into the whole racist bullshit. At that point, skins were, weren't exactly pacifists, but they didn't have any politics, and they actually got along and chilled with Jamaican immigrants a lot out of mutual love for reggae. But this is a great book. A lot of these guys are fucking terrifying. This ranges, it has some from the late 70s, I guess, when all the political stuff started happening. There's a guy in a National Front shirt there. But there's a lot of late 60s, skins in here. Lots of cool pictures, like this kid, this lovely couple. Nothing says hard like a Pegasus tattoo on your chest. What else? This dapper young gentleman. Again, bleacher jeans. Never got it. Never wore them. Worn a lot of silly stuff, but never the cow pants. The interesting thing here is there's a lot of like the very strict regulations for the types of jeans. This was very much like the late 60s style. Very interesting stuff, like the hairstyles, like how much should be showing. The girls' Chelsea cut there. How to snap your fingers a certain way. Like, this guy really studied into that stuff, I guess. You know, this looks like it's out of a Sears catalog. It's kind of funny. Oh, yeah, and in the mid-70s, when the fashion started to kind of fade a bit, and the guys were still kind of like soccer hooligans or whatever, but they started, you know, glam got big, and they started growing their hair out. The smooths and the suede heads and stuff, they cover that as well. I don't know. If you're a nerd about subcultures and you like reading about where that stuff came from, this is definitely very, very interesting. And I got this Going Underground book. This has been going long, whatever. Turn it off at any time, folks. This came out around the same time as American Hardcore. Not a fan of the American Hardcore book or Stephen Blush, the guy who wrote it. Mainly because his whole bent was hardcore music ended in 1986 or 1984 or whenever. It was sometime in the mid-80s that he deemed that it was done. And hardcore didn't exist after that. What was I doing all throughout the 90s and all the 2000s and once in a while up till now? I just hate that shit. I mean, yeah, it changed a lot. People's definitions of it changed. But it's just because people stopped paying attention to it or it changed in a certain way that the writers of the books didn't like doesn't mean that it stopped existing. And I think this guy actually wrote this as sort of a reaction to that because he stayed involved with it way beyond that. He was involved until 1992, and it's just one guy's experience through all of it, this guy George Wachala. And I read this so long ago, I can't remember all the places he lived, but he lived in Texas, I think. He lived in New York for a while. He was kind of a journeyman and got to see a lot of hardcore punk just kind of spring up all over the world, or all over the country anyway. And you know, it's sort of an oral history of hardcore, but just in his through his eyes, I guess. And it's another cool read, another one that I've had for a long time. I actually bought this at Sound Idea, actually, the Crate Digger guy's place. So, you know, full circle with that, I guess. But that's a great book. I think now that it's up to a half an hour, it's time to cut you guys loose. If you made it through all the way through this, as usual, thanks for tolerating my mug. Yeah, I don't know. Books, check them out.